Your response to the first video of the series has been overwhelming. Thank you for watching it, for your engagement, and if you haven't watched it, I'll make sure to link it to this video. It is important that we understand the economic implications of policy and raise awareness of how economics impacts your life. I truly believe that the difference between succeeding in today's world and not is a good understanding of economics. That is the main purpose of this YouTube channel, to make economics accessible to all. Thank you for subscribing and following. Today we'll revisit the minimum wage laws. In the first video, I talked about what the change is and why it will lead to more opportunities for employment. Today, we'll talk about some of the concerns that have been raised and how we should view the economics of the new policy and learn how to navigate the market. One thing that I want to make clear, if you're listening to economists that only presents you with one side of the argument, then you need to find a better economist. As economists, we recognize that trade-offs exist. Every policy has benefits and costs. What it comes down to is what you value and what you want to accomplish. Last week, we talked about the benefits. Today, we'll talk about some of the costs in order of how often I have seen them mentioned on social media and through discussions. Lastly, I will provide my recommendations for the private sector and policymakers. Get your cup of coffee and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Dr. A. The first misconception is that eliminating the multiple minimum wage tiers will push all wages to 325 rials. This misconception mistakes minimum wage with actual wages or average wages. Also, this analysis suffers from what we call selection bias. When you analyze the average wage, you're only including the people with jobs in your analysis, when in reality you should be including all people in that category, even the ones earning no wage because they can't find employment. Let us look at this example. Here I'm presenting a hypothetical distribution of wages for diploma earners. The previous minimum wage is 325, but the average wage conditional on being employed is higher. This is the average based on having a job. Diploma earners had a distribution of wages. However, since the minimum wage of the next tier of education was 450, it becomes very difficult to negotiate for a job offer higher than your degree, because the system has connected wages with education directly. A typical negotiation would end with something on the lines of, we can't offer you more than 449 rials, for instance, because 450 is for people with a higher diploma. We would do the same for higher diploma earners and the bachelor degree holders. So if you look at this, there's a distribution of salaries for each category of individuals. Not everyone is at the minimum wage. We should expect a distribution of wages to still exist with the new policy. We can see something along the lines of these distributions. I have explained that there is a distribution of wages, but will the average wage fall? This is possible if we only look at the people with jobs, though. One issue with calculating the average wage here is that we're only including those with jobs. In this example, the distribution of wages looks like this. The average wage, when including only the employed individuals, would be somewhere around here. However, there is a fraction of individuals that are unemployed, and their wage is 0. What happens when we include their wage as part of the calculation? The average wage falls. When comparing wages and discussing the impact of wages, we have to be clear on what we're including in the sample. We should be interested in overall wages, not just those employed, because this policy will increase the number of people employed. But what happens to average wage, I will admit, is not clear. This will depend on the elasticity of labor demand and labor supply. The role of economists and the government here is to collect this data and report it so we can all be informed on how the market reacts to these policy changes. The question then becomes, is it better for more people to have jobs at lower wages, or are we better off with few having jobs at higher wages? I can't answer that question for you. This is a personal question and one about your values. From my perspective, I would rather more people enter the labor market and have a chance to succeed and move up the ladder. I believe Omani youth are successful and they need to be in the door, not outside of it. That's my belief. For others, they would rather higher wages for fewer people. The point here, there is a trade-off and we need to be aware of that trade-off. At this point, none of us know how responsive the market will be. This is where we need data. The second misconception I've heard is that delinking education from minimum wage will reduce the value of education. Once again, this assumes that the only reason firms pay individual wages is because they have to. That implies that education doesn't have value other than the fact that the government is forcing the firms to pay it. What we know is that firms across the world value education. The college premium exists without a mandate in many places. What changes with the new minimum wage policy is that employees will have to signal their education is valuable, that they actually learn and are able to apply what they learned to problem solve in the workforce. Those students that excel and build their experiences in education will earn higher wages. The new policy will actually reward education more than just the degree did. As a job seeker, you will be expected to signal what you learned. A couple of weeks ago, I released a discussion with the University of Kentucky Gatton School of Business about my advice for international students and how to build their expertise and experiences while they're in school. This is a good time to revisit that video. Employers will hire those that are able to communicate their value at higher wages. Your degree adds value. Who will be harmed in this approach? Those that do not build their experiences while earning their degree. Those that just go to class, coast by, and do the bare minimum to earn their degree. They will not receive as high of an education premium as those that exert the effort. This is a good thing for the economy because we align incentives here. We allow effort to dictate wages. So education matters and it will continue to matter. What changes is how you signal it. It is no longer just about having a piece of paper, it's about articulating your value and how your knowledge fits with the economy. An important secondary effect here is that job seekers can now apply to more jobs that are in line with their education and experience. The third comment that I've received multiple times is that the private industry will force everyone to accept lower paying jobs. This relates to the first issue that I presented. What will happen to the average wage in the economy? The reality is that demanders of labor, the firms here, are limited in Oman. So they have monopsony power. Monopsony power is when a buyer of resource has market power and therefore is able to exert their power and influence prices. This is something that needs to be considered in the new policy model. There are several ways to reduce monopsony power. I'll list some here. 1, allow labor to organize so they could equate the power dynamic between supply and demand. Labor unions are important here. 2, increase information. Making salary and job postings transparent allows market participants to negotiate and to use that information. Transparent salary information has been shown to increase gender wage equity as well. 3, increase private sector firms to compete for labor. Which brings me to the next issue. If we liberalize the labor market, we have to increase access to entrepreneurship and business creation in Oman. We need more local firms operating. This has been an area that I've discussed several occasions. I will link to the 2 discussions around Oman's entrepreneurship ecosystem that I've recently been involved with. I'm going to include them in the links below. Point being, we need more business to compete for local talent. Otherwise, liberalizing wages without liberalizing the business creation process will defeat the purpose of this policy. Also, we need to support local businesses, not by mandating the support, but by using our money to support the businesses that we care about. As a customer, you can engage in this by supporting the local businesses. Look at the consumer choices you make. You can be part of the solution. Government contracts and tender boards should evaluate proposals of firms and consider Omanization rates. We cannot mandate Omanization rates, but not consider it in the evaluation of contracts. This approach has the stick but no carrot. Some firms are taking their role in Omanization seriously, and they should be rewarded for their efforts in building labor talent. We need to align the incentives. If not, then we are creating costs for firms without providing benefits. The Omani employee becomes a burden to the firm. I don't think that is the intention of the policy. Finally, the private industry will have to invest in Omanis. For years, I've heard businesses say that they want to hire Omanis, but they're expensive. They're expensive to hire. Now is your opportunity. Hire them, develop them, and allow them to grow. I would like to see each firm and each business, small or large, include a management training program, for instance. We have to invest in our employees. Fourth comment I have seen circulating is that we should have a different minimum wage for each sector of the economy. While I agree that not all labor segments are the same, maintaining multiple minimum wages and overseeing the regulation is going to be expensive. Plus, how do we define sectors, industries? What about jobs that fall into different industries and different sectors? This gets cumbersome and adds more rigidity in the market. Remember, less is more in this situation. The fifth comment that I've seen has to do with living wages, and that the minimum wage should compensate for a living wage and the living standards. I think this is a valuable discussion, a discussion that we should have. What does it mean? We can first start with, how do you define living wages? What are the necessities of living? Is living food, shelter, and transportation? And if it is, what does shelter look like? What about transportation? The problem with this proposal is we get into a subjective analysis and definition of what it means to have a living wage. I think it's valuable to ask the question if 325 rials is a valid minimum wage. But if we plan on increasing it or changing it, then we need to have a discussion and be clear about how we define the minimum wage and what it means. Will this number adjust with inflation, or will it remain constant through time? The cost of living in Oman is high, but it wasn't always this high. Our cost of living increased in years when mandated wage increases were put into place. The wage increases did not come with increases in productivity, and that led to higher cost of living. Finally, I would like to point out that discussing wages is not like discussing any other price. The discussion about wages is more than the discussion about price adjustments. Wages impact morale and the sense of worth. It is important for people to be involved and aware of why the changes are being made. Information and buy-in are important for a successful policy. Wages are a complicated discussion, and awareness is important. That's why I have taken it on to help explain some of the intricacies of this policy and the economics of it. If you've watched this far, thank you for listening to me. I hope this informs and helps you analyze the minimum wage policy a little more clearly. I will end with a final word. As an economist, I think the gain from increasing the job opportunities outweighs the threat of lower wages. The minimum wage policy is a good thing for the economy because we need more people employed. We need to increase private industry, and this increases the likelihood of that happening. Like I said in the beginning, every policy has trade-offs. We will not know if benefits outweigh the cost until we collect the data, analyze the data, and report the results. This economist is at your service. A high minimum wage while having large unemployment is a false sense of security. I would rather see people employed and receive a wage based on their productivity. For that to happen, we all need to work together. This policy's success relies on job seekers, employers, consumers, entrepreneurs, and those of us evaluating the policy. If you found this helpful, leave a comment, and share this video with someone that might benefit from it. See you next week on Coffee with Dr. A.